At 0900 on July 4, 1943, Private First Class Evan Evans crouched behind sandbags on Rendova Island, watching 16 Japanese Betty bombers emerge through broken clouds over Blanche Channel. He was 22 years old, 3 weeks into this muddy hell, with 0 aircraft shot down. The bombers were flying straight toward what the Marines grimly called Suicide Point. 2 days earlier, 59 Americans had been killed on this same beach. On July 2, the Japanese had sent 18 bombers and 440 fighters. Rendova's radar sets had been knocked offline by an earlier raid, no early warning, no time to prepare. The bombers came in low over the water in the early afternoon, striking fuel dumps first, then ammunition stores, then the field hospital where wounded men waited for evacuation. Evans had watched it unfold from his gun position. Fire turned the beach into an inferno. Explosions hurled debris 300 feet into the air. Marines ran through flames trying to reach the wounded. Most did not make it. 77 more were injured, 4 of them from the 9th Defense Battalion's 90mm gun crews. The battalion lost 2 of its 6 155mm long-tom artillery pieces. Trucks melted. Ammunition cooked off for 6 hours. The Japanese had named their target well. Suicide Point sat on the northern tip of Rendova, a choke point every supply ship had to pass. Every Marine on the island could see it burning. Evans and his gun crew fired 32 rounds that day and hit nothing. The bombers were too fast. Radar operators worked blind. Gun directors calculated intercepts with binoculars and stopwatches. By the time the shells reached altitude, the Bettys were already gone. That night, Lieutenant Colonel William Shire gathered the 90mm crews. He did not waste words. The radar sets were destroyed, and replacement parts would not arrive for days. The Japanese would return. They always did. And next time, there might not be enough Marines left to bury the dead. Evans cleaned his gun until 0300. The 90mm M1 anti-aircraft gun weighed 9 tons and could fire a 24-pound shell to 33,000 feet, with a maximum rate of fire of 28 rounds per minute. None of it mattered without radar. The Japanese Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber had a top speed of 270 miles per hour. At that speed, a bomber could cross 2 miles in 27 seconds. Human eyesight and mechanical calculators could not track targets that fast. The 9th Defense Battalion had landed on Rendova on June 30 with a simple mission: protect the beachhead while Army artillery shelled Japanese positions on New Georgia across the channel. The battalion brought 3 batteries of 90mm guns, 4 guns per battery, 12 guns total. They were meant to create an umbrella of flak no Japanese aircraft could penetrate. Instead, they had become target practice. If you want to see how Evans and his crew turned Suicide Point into a graveyard for Japanese bombers, please hit that like button. It helps us share more stories about Marines who fought in the Pacific. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Evans. The morning of July 3 brought rain, is solid, relentless rain that turned Rendova into a swamp. Marines stood watch in water up to their knees. Supplies rotted on the beach, but the storm brought one gift: the Japanese did not fly in heavy weather. The 9th Defense Battalion used the time to repair what it could. Salvage teams stripped parts from damaged equipment. Mechanics worked through the night. By dawn on July 4, something had changed. Radar operators reported their SCR-268 sets were operational, not perfect, but functional. Gun directors checked their gear. Fire control systems showed green. Communications were established between all 12 gun positions. Evans loaded shells into the ready rack as his crew moved through their drills: loader, rammer, fuse setter, gunner. They had done it 10,000 times in training, but training did not prepare you for Bettys dropping bombs on your friends. At 0845, radar detected a large formation inbound from Rabaul, distance 120 miles, bearing 320 degrees, altitude 14,000 feet. The formation was flying straight down the slot, heading for Rendova. Shire gave the order. Every gun crew stood ready. This time they had radar. This time they would see the Japanese coming. And this time, Evan Evans was about to prove that one Marine with a 90mm gun could change the mathematics of air defense forever. The question was whether he would live long enough to see it. The radar operators called out updates every 30 seconds. The Japanese formation split. One group turned toward New Georgia. The other continued straight at Rendova, 16 bombers with 180 fighters as escort. They were descending now, 12,000 feet. The Combat Air Patrol had been pulled north to intercept a different raid. Rendova's guns were alone. Evans watched his gun director, a Sperry M4 mechanical computer that received radar data and calculated where shells needed to explode to intercept a moving target. The director sent electrical signals to the gun mount, which adjusted automatically in theory. In practice, The M4 was designed for optical tracking and was never meant to work with radar. The connection was awkward and imprecise. The best crews could place shells within 200 meters of the target. A 90mm shell had a burst radius of about 50 meters. That meant multiple guns firing together were normally required for a hit. Evans did not have multiple guns. He had one battery C, gun 3. The formation closed to 70 miles. The radar plot showed a tight V formation, textbook Japanese bomber tactics. The Bettys would approach at medium altitude, drop their bombs, turn hard, and run for home while the Zeros dealt with any fighters that tried to follow. Rendova had no fighters. At 0915, the air raid siren began its wail. Every Marine on the island knew what that sound meant. Men ran for foxholes. Medics grabbed their kits. The Seabees stopped unloading supply ships and took cover. The beach, crowded with activity seconds earlier, went silent except for the gun crews, who stayed at their posts. Evans checked his ammunition, high-explosive shells with variable-time fuses. The fuse setter adjusted detonation in half-second increments. At 10,000 feet, a shell traveled for about 18 seconds before exploding. If the timing was off by even 1 second, the shell would burst too high or too low, missing by half a mile. 50 miles out now, the Japanese held steady at 10,000 feet. That altitude placed them above most light anti-aircraft fire but well within range of the 90mm guns. The bomber crews knew Rendova had heavy guns. They had seen the flak 2 days earlier. They were not worried. American anti-aircraft fire had a reputation for inaccuracy. The Japanese had been flying through it for 18 months. Most crews considered it an inconvenience, not a threat. They were about to learn otherwise. At 30 miles, Shire gave the order to commence firing. All 12 guns opened up at once. The sound was overwhelming. Each gun fired a shell every 3 seconds. 24-pound projectiles screamed into the sky at 2,800 feet per second. The noise made speech impossible. Muzzle blasts knocked dust from sandbags. Evans settled into the rhythm. His crew had drilled until every motion was automatic. The loader grabbed a shell from the ready rack. The rammer drove it into the breech. The fuse setter dialed in the time. The breech closed. The gun fired. The empty casing ejected. The entire sequence took 3 seconds. Load, ram, set, fire, again and again. Radar operators tracked the Japanese formation with precision. The repaired SCR-268 now fed data to the gun directors faster than the mechanical computers could process it. The M4 calculators clicked in Word. Elevation and azimuth changed constantly as the bombers closed in. At 20 miles, the first American shells burst at altitude. Black puffs of smoke appeared ahead of the formation. Too far left. The Japanese adjusted course slightly and kept coming. Evans watched through the gun sight as his shells detonated 500 meters from the lead bomber, close, but not close enough. A Betty bomber had an 82-foot wingspan. Near misses meant nothing. Only direct hits or extremely close bursts could bring down an aircraft that large. 15 miles. The Marines had fired 88 rounds. Then something changed, something that would turn Evan Evans from an unknown private into the deadliest anti-aircraft gunner in the Pacific. But first, he had to survive the next 6 minutes, because the Japanese bombers were beginning their attack run, and Evans was directly in their path. At 12 miles, the lead Betty started its descent. The formation dropped to 8,000 feet attack altitude. Bombardiers would be peering through their sights now, calculating wind, adjusting for the island's position. Rendova was a fixed target, hard to miss. Radar operators updated their plots. The Japanese were coming in from the northwest at 260 miles per hour. In 3 minutes, they would be overhead. In 4 minutes, bombs would be falling. Evans kept firing. His gun was heating up now. The barrel temperature was rising with each shot. Too hot and the rifling would warp. The gun would become inaccurate. But there was no time to let it cool. The Japanese weren't waiting. Load, ram, set, fire. At 10 miles, something happened that changed everything. Battery C's gun. Director locked onto the lead bomber. The radar return was strong, clean. The M4 computer began calculating intercept solutions with unusual precision. The gun elevated 2 degrees, adjusted azimuth 3 degrees. Left, Evans fired. The shell left the barrel at half a mile per second, climbed through 8,000 feet of tropical air. The variable time fuse counted down. 18 seconds after leaving the gun, the shell exploded. 200 m ahead of the lead Betty. The bomber flew straight into the blast. Shrapnel tore through the right engine, howling. The engine caught fire immediately. Black smoke poured from the NL. The pilot tried to maintain formation. The Japanese didn't break formation easily. Training and discipline kept them flying straight. But the fire spread. Within 30 seconds, flames were visible along the entire right wing. The bomber dropped out of Formation started losing altitude. The pilot had two choices: try to reach Renova and drop his bombs or turn back toward Japanese-held territory and hope to crash land somewhere survivable. He chose to turn back. The Betty rolled right and began a shallow descent toward the channel. It never made it. At 6,000 ft, the right wing separated from the fuselage. The bomber tumbled out of the sky and hit the water 4 miles northwest of Renova. 1 down, 15 to go. The remaining bombers tightened their formation. They were at 7 miles now, close enough that Evans could see them without binoculars. The Bettys looked like dark crosses against the morning sky. Their bomb bay doors were opening. Battery C fired again and again. The other 90mm guns across Renova joined in. The sky filled with black bursts. The Japanese formation disappeared into a cloud of flak. When the smoke cleared, 2 more Bettys were trailing smoke. One had lost its tail section. It went into an immediate spin. The other tried to maintain altitude, but was losing power from both engines. Neither made it past 5 miles from the island. 3 down. The Japanese bombarders released early. They were supposed to fly directly over Renova before dropping. Instead, they dumped their loads at 6 miles out and turned hard to the west. Bombs fell into empty ocean. Massive geysers of water erupted half a mile from shore. Not a single bomb hit the island. Evans didn't stop firing. His crew didn't pause. The Japanese were running now, but they were still in range. The Bettys were fast, but they'd spent fuel getting to Renova. They were heavy with armor and defensive guns, and they were trying to climb to escape the flak. Climbing made them slower. Predictable. Battery C's gun director tracked a bomber in the middle of the formation. Evans adjusted his aim. Fired. The shell burst 50 meters below the bomber's belly. Close enough. The concussion wave hit the aircraft like a hammer. The Betty's nose pitched down. The pilot fought for control. He didn't get it. The bomber entered a dive it couldn't recover from. 4 down. The remaining 12 Bettys were splitting up now. Formation discipline had broken. Each pilot was flying for his own survival. Some headed west toward New Georgia. Others turned northwest back toward Rabaul. The Zero escort had disappeared entirely. The fighters had seen enough, but the Marines hadn't. And in the next 60 seconds, Evans and Battery C were about to add 8 more bombers to their tally. 8 more kills. That would make July 4, 1943 the single deadliest day in the history of Japanese naval aviation over the Solomons if the gun barrel held out. The gun barrel was glowing now. Evans could see heat waves rising from the metal. The crew had fired 42 rounds in 7 minutes. The 90mm M1 was designed for sustained fire, but not like this. Not at this rate. The barrel temperature was approaching critical levels. Evans didn't care. Neither did his crew. They kept loading. A Betty bomber broke west, trying to escape over New Georgia. It was climbing hard. 9,000 feet. The pilot thought altitude would save him. It didn't. Battery C's radar locked on. The gun director calculated the intercept. Evans fired twice in quick succession. The first shell missed high. The second shell exploded 30 meters behind the bomber's tail. Shrapnel severed the elevator controls. The Betty's nose dropped. The pilot tried to compensate with engine power. The bomber went into a flat spin and crashed into the jungle 3 miles inland on New Georgia. 5 down. 2 more Bettys were heading northwest together. They were flying low now, 5,000 feet, trying to stay under the radar. It didn't work. Renova's SCR-268 could track targets down to 3,000 feet. The gun directors had clear returns on both aircraft. Battery C took the lead bomber. Battery E took the trailer. Both guns fired within seconds of each other. Both scored hits. The lead Betty took a direct hit to the port engine. The engine exploded. The wing folded. The bomber rolled inverted and went straight down into Blanche's channel. The second Betty lost its tail section. It flew for another 8 seconds before entering an uncontrollable dive. 7 down. The sky over Renova was filled with smoke now. Burning aircraft debris was falling into the ocean. Oil slicks spread across the water. The remaining 9 Japanese bombers were scattered across a 10 miles radius. No formation, no coordination. Just individual pilots trying to survive. 3 Bettys turned due west heading for the open ocean. They were abandoning the mission, running for home. But home was 400 m away, and they had to cross 200 m of ocean that was now filling with American shells. Battery C tracked the nearest bomber. Range 8 miles, altitude 7,000 feet, speed 280 miles per hour. The bomber was running at full power, probably burning fuel at twice the normal rate. The crew would be lucky to make it halfway to Rabaul before they ran dry. They didn't get the chance. Evans fired 3 rounds. The third one exploded directly underneath the bomber's fuselage. The blast tore through the bomb bay. The Betty hadn't dropped all its ordnance. 500-pound bombs detonated inside the aircraft. The explosion was massive. Pieces of the bomber scattered across half a mile of ocean. 8 down. The other batteries across Renova were getting hits now. 2. Battery E claimed 2 more bombers in quick succession. Battery A got another. The sky was becoming a shooting gallery. The Japanese had sent 16 bombers to destroy Renova. Instead, Renova was destroying them. Evans swung his gun to track another Betty. This one was heading due north. Maximum range, 10 mi out. The bomber was at 11,000 feet and climbing. The pilot had figured out that altitude was his only chance. Get high enough and the American shells couldn't reach him, but 11,000 feet was well within the 90 mm range. The M1 could fire effectively to 33,000 feet. This bomber was barely a third of that. Evans elevated the gun to maximum. Fired. The shell climbed for 22 seconds, exploded 200 m ahead of the bomber. The pilot saw the burst and turned hard right directly into the next shell. The blast hit the cockpit. The Betty's nose shattered. The aircraft tumbled out of control and fell into the ocean 9 miles north of Renova. 9 down. 9:30, the sky was clearing. The Japanese attack was over, broken, destroyed. Of the 16 Betty bombers that had approached Renova, only 4 were still flying. They were heading northwest at maximum speed, climbing, running. The Zero escort had already abandoned them and fled back toward Rabaul, but Battery C wasn't finished. Evans tracked one of the retreating bombers. Range 12 miles. Maximum effective range for accurate fire. The bomber was at 14,000 feet on the edge of the flak zone. Evans fired anyway. The shell arced through the sky, exploded 300 meters from the bomber. Too far for a kill, but close enough to send a message. Renova wasn't suicide point anymore. It was a killing ground, and the Japanese had just learned that the hard way. The question was whether they'd be back tomorrow, and whether Evans and his gun would be ready. The ceasefire order came at 9:32. 27 minutes after the first radar contact, the guns fell silent. The sudden quiet was almost painful after the continuous roar of the 90 mm cannons. Evans stepped back from his gun. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from exhaustion. His ears were ringing so badly he could barely hear. The gun crew collapsed against the sandbags. They'd been firing nonstop for 27 minutes. Load, ram, set, fire. Over and over until their bodies moved on pure muscle memory. The gunner's log showed 53 rounds fired from Battery C's Gun 3 alone. Across Renova, the 12 90 mm guns had expended a total of 88 rounds. 88 shells to engage 16 bombers. The results were unprecedented. Shai walked the gun line at 0:10. He was counting. Every gun crew was claiming kills. Some crews claimed 2. Battery C claimed 4 confirmed. Battery E claimed 3. Battery A claimed 2. The math was adding up to something extraordinary. By 0:30, the radar operators confirmed what the gun crews already knew. 4 Japanese bombers had escaped. 4 out of 16. That meant 12 had gone down. 12 bombers destroyed in 27 minutes. The 9th Defense Battalion had just set a record. No American anti-aircraft unit in the Pacific had ever achieved that kill ratio. Not at Guadalcanal, not at Midway, not anywhere. 12 bombers with 88 rounds meant a hit rate of nearly 14%. Most anti-aircraft units were happy with 2%. But the numbers didn't tell the whole story. The gun crews had done more than shoot down airplanes. They'd broken a Japanese attack completely. 16 bombers had approached Renova carrying 8,000 pounds of bombs each. That was 128,000 pounds of high explosives meant for the beach, for the Supply dumps, for the Marines. Not one bomb hit the island. The Japanese had dumped their loads early and run. The 4 bombers that escaped were damaged. Radar tracked them limping northwest at reduced speed and altitude. 2 of them probably wouldn't make it back to Rabaul. They'd run out of fuel somewhere over the Solomon Sea and ditch in the ocean. By 1100 hours, work parties were recovering debris from the water. Pieces of Japanese aircraft were washing up on the beach. Engine cowlings, wing sections, a tail assembly with the red circle still visible. The wreckage spread across 5 miles of ocean. The Seabs returned to unloading supply ships. The beach came back to life. Marines who'd been hiding in foxholes emerged and went back to work. Life on Renova continued, but something had changed. The island that had been called Suicide Point 2 days ago had just proven it could defend itself. Evans cleaned his gun at 1,300 hours. The barrel was too hot to touch even 3 hours after the last shot. The rifling was still intact. No warping, no damage. The M1 had held up under punishment that should have destroyed it. The other gun crews were doing the same, cleaning, inspecting, reloading. The Japanese would be back. They always came back. But next time, they'd remember July 4th. They'd remember that Renova wasn't an easy target anymore. At 1,500 hours, a photographer from the Marine Corps Combat Camera Unit arrived at Battery C. He wanted pictures. The gun crew that had scored the most kills. Evans and his crew stood beside their 90mm gun. Boone on the left, Evans in the middle, Gamborowski on the right. 3 Marines who just made history. The photographer took 6 pictures. Only one survived the war. It ended up in the National Archives as photo 127 gigawatts. The caption read, "This is one of the anti-aircraft guns which wiped out a Japanese bomber fleet of 12 planes in a single day at Renova Island." But that photograph was taken in the afternoon. In the morning, while the battle was still being analyzed, while gun crews were still counting their kills, something else was happening 400 m northwest. At Rabaul, Japanese commanders were receiving reports from the 4 bombers that had escaped. The reports were alarming. The Americans had radar directed anti-aircraft fire, accurate radar, the kind that could track bombers through clouds and guide shells to within meters of the target. And that meant every Japanese airbase in the Solomons had just become vulnerable. Because if Renova could do this, other American positions could too. The mathematics of air combat in the Pacific had just changed. The Japanese would need to adjust their tactics or stop flying daylight raids altogether. But that decision would take days to make. And in those days, Evans and the 9th Defense Battalion would face something even more dangerous than bombers. They would face their own command. The first message from Admiral Halley's headquarters arrived at 1,600 hours on July 4th. It was short, 3 words: confirm kill count. Sure, confirmed. 12 Japanese Betty bombers destroyed. 4 damaged and fleeing. 88 rounds expended. 0 American casualties during the engagement. 0 bombs hit the island. The second message arrived 30 minutes later. This one was longer. Hawley wanted a full after-action report. He wanted to know how a Marine Defense Battalion had achieved a 90% destruction rate against a Japanese bomber formation. He wanted technical details, radar settings, fire control procedures, everything. Because if Renova could do this, every American position in the Pacific needed to know how. Shent the evening of July 4th. Writing reports. The radar operators wrote reports. The gun directors wrote reports. Every gun crew documented their procedures. How they'd integrated the SCR-268 radar with the Sperry M4 gun. Director. How they'd adjusted for the lag in the mechanical computer. How they'd calculated lead time for fast-moving targets. The reports went up the chain of command from Renova to 14th Corps Headquarters, from 14th Corps to South Pacific Area Command, from South Pacific to Pacific Fleet. By July 6, officers at Pearl Harbor were reading about Evans and Battery C. But while the reports were being written, the Japanese were making decisions of their own. On July 5, Rabble sent 6 bombers to attack Renova. Only 6. They came in at night, high altitude, dropped their bombs from 20,000 feet, missed the island completely. The 90mm guns fired 37 rounds and claimed 2 hits. The remaining bombers turned back before reaching the target. On July 6, the Japanese tried again. 4 bombers, same result, high altitude, night attack. No hits on the island. 1 bomber shot down. The pattern was clear. The Japanese had learned. Daylight raids on Renova were suicide. The radar-directed anti-aircraft fire was too accurate, too deadly. If they wanted to attack American positions in the New Georgia Group, they'd have to find another way. By July 10, Japanese air raids on Renova had stopped almost entirely. 1. Attack on July 20, 6 planes. Another on August 1, 6 planes. Both high altitude raids that accomplished nothing. The Japanese had effectively conceded the airspace over Renova to American anti-aircraft guns. The 9th Defense Battalion's success had strategic consequences. With Renova secure, the 155mm long-tom artillery batteries could fire without interruption. They pounded Japanese positions on New Georgia across Blanche Channel 24 hours a day. The big guns made the American advance on Munda Airfield possible. Munda fell on August 5. The airfield that had been the primary Japanese airbase in the Central Solomons was now in American hands. Marine and Army engineers had it operational within 72 hours. American fighters were flying missions from Munda by August 14. The campaign that had started with the Renova landings on June 30 was over in 5 weeks. The 9th Defense Battalion moved to New Georgia in October to defend the newly captured airfield. They set up their guns around Munda and waited for Japanese counterattacks. The attacks never came. The Japanese had abandoned the Central Solomons. They were falling back to Bougainville. The momentum had shifted. The Americans were advancing. The Japanese were retreating. Evans and his crew spent 6 months on New Georgia. They fired their 90mm gun at occasional reconnaissance aircraft. They shot down 3 more planes, but nothing compared to July 4. That day remained unique. The day when everything worked, when the radar locked on, when the shells found their targets, when 12 Japanese bombers fell from the sky in 27 minutes. The official Marine Corps history would later call it one of the most successful anti-aircraft engagements of the Pacific War. The guns had performed beyond expectations. The crews had executed flawlessly. The Japanese had been stopped cold, but there was a cost. A cost that didn't show up in the kill reports or the after-action summaries. A cost that Evans and every other gun crew member would carry for the rest of their lives. Because shooting down 12 bombers meant killing more than 100 Japanese aircrew. And some of those men had survived the crashes. Some had parachuted into the ocean. Some had struggled in the water while American ships steamed past without stopping. War had rules, but sometimes the rules didn't matter. Sometimes survival meant watching men drown, and sometimes heroes had to live with what they'd done to stay alive. The 9th Defense Battalion remained on New Georgia until March 1944. They defended Munda Airfield against attacks that never materialized. The Japanese had moved their bombers north to Rabble. They were conserving aircraft for the defense of the Marianas. The Central Solomons had become a backwater. Evans was promoted to corporal in October 1943. Boone made corporal in December. Gamborowski stayed private first class until January 1944. The promotions came with citations, official recognition for their actions on July 4, but no medals. Defense Battalion personnel rarely received medals for anti-aircraft work. Shooting down planes was considered routine duty. In April 1944, the battalion shipped to the Russell Islands for rest and retraining. 6 months of combat had worn down men and equipment. The 90mm guns needed barrel replacements. Fire control systems needed recalibration. The Marines needed time away from the gun positions. They got 6 weeks. Then new orders arrived. The battalion was going to Guam. The landing on Guam began July 21, 1944. The 9th Defense Battalion came ashore at Agat on the first day. They set up their anti-aircraft guns around the beachhead. Their mission was air defense and perimeter security. The Japanese had fortified Guam heavily. The island had been in Japanese hands since December 1941. 22,000 Japanese troops were dug into the jungle and limestone caves. The battle for Guam lasted 3 weeks. The 9th Defense Battalion fired their guns at Japanese aircraft and ground targets. They shot down 4 more planes. They used their 90mm guns in direct fire mode against Japanese positions on the northern cliffs. High explosive shells proved effective against fortified bunkers. But the real enemy on Guam wasn't the Japanese. It was dengue fever. The disease swept through the battalion in August. Hundreds of Marines fell ill. High fever, joint pain, exhaustion. Dengue wasn't fatal, but it was incapacitating. Men who could fight through enemy fire couldn't function. With dengue, Evans caught it in mid-August. He spent 2 weeks in a field hospital, lost 20 pounds. When he returned to duty, the battle for Guam was over. The Japanese had retreated to the northern cliffs. Thousands committed suicide by jumping rather than surrendering. The 9th Defense Battalion stayed on Guam for the rest of the war. They defended Appa Harbor and the newly built airfield. American B-29 superfortresses were flying bombing missions against Japan from Guam by October 1944. The 9th's job was to protect them. The Japanese launched occasional air raids, small formations, 4 or 5 planes, night attacks. Mostly. The 9th Defense Battalion shot down 6 more aircraft between September 1944 and March 1945. Their total for the war reached 46 confirmed kills. 46 Japanese aircraft destroyed by 1 Marine Defense Battalion. July 4, 1943 remained their best day. 12 kills in 1 engagement. No American anti-aircraft unit in the Pacific ever matched that record. Evans was on Guam when the war ended in August 1945. He was a sergeant by then, 24 years old, 3 years in the Marines, 2 Pacific campaigns, 46 enemy aircraft shot down by his battalion, 12 of them on one morning. When everything worked perfectly, the 9th Defense Battalion returned to the United States in February 1946. They sailed into San Diego Harbor on the 23rd. The battalion was deactivated on March 1 at Camp Leune, North Carolina. The Marines went home, back to Indiana, back to Michigan, back to lives interrupted by war. Evans returned to Richmond, Indiana. He'd left as a 21-year-old private. He came back as a decorated sergeant, but Richmond was the same. The war had changed Evans more than Evans had changed Richmond. He re-enlisted in 1948, served through the Korean War, made staff sergeant, left the Marine Corps in 1953. 11 years of service, 2 wars. He worked as a machinist after the war. Married, had children, and lived a quiet life. But he never forgot July 4, 1943, the day the planes fell, the day Suicide Point became a graveyard, the day 88 shells destroyed 12 Japanese bombers and forever changed the mathematics of air defense in the Pacific. He seldom spoke of it. Most veterans didn't. Those who had been there understood, those who hadn't could not. So Evans remained silent, worked his job, raised his family, and lived his life until 1993, 50 years after Rendova, when a Marine Corps researcher discovered a photograph in the National Archives and tracked down the men pictured. Evans was 72 years old. He had assumed everyone had forgotten. He was wrong. In 1993, Alan Walker was an archivist at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, when he received a letter from a veteran named Evan Evans. The note was simple. Evans sought a photograph of a 90mm anti-aircraft gun. Any image would suffice. He wanted to show his grandchildren what the gun looked like. Walker spent half a day searching and found plenty of photos of the M1 gun. But something about Evans' letter lingered with him. He read it again. Evans mentioned Rendova, July 4, 1943, and setting a record for shooting down Japanese bombers. Walker returned to the archives, this time searching under the Rendova Series 127 gigawatts combat photographs from the New Georgia campaign. On the 4th page, he found it, 3 Marines standing beside a 90mm gun. The caption identified them: Private First Class Evan Evans, 22, Richmond, Indiana; Private Roy E. Boone, Indianapolis, Indiana; Private First Class John S. Skamborowski, 20, Saginaw, Michigan. The description read, "This is one of the anti-aircraft guns which wiped out a Japanese bomber fleet of 12 planes in a single day at Rendova Island." Walker sent the photograph to Evans. 2 weeks later came the response. Evans had never known the photo existed. He had never expected anyone to remember. Seeing himself at 22, standing beside the gun that had made history, resurfaced 50 years of memories he had tried to forget. He wrote Walker a letter of thanks, saying it meant more than Walker could imagine, that he had carried Rendova with him every day for 5 decades, and that maybe now he could let some of it go. Evans died in 2004 at age 83. Boone passed in 1998. Skamborowski in 2006. The gun crew that had made history on July 4, 1943, was gone, but the story survived. The photograph survived. The official record endured. The 9th Defense Battalion's achievement at Rendova became part of Marine Corps history, a piece of the larger story of how American forces learned to defeat Japanese air power in the Pacific. The lessons from Rendova spread throughout the theater. Radar-directed anti-aircraft fire became standard procedure. Gun crews trained in the integration techniques pioneered by the 9th Defense Battalion. Kill ratios improved across the board. Japanese bombers faced increasingly lethal defensive fire at every American position. By 1944, Japanese daylight bombing raids had become rare. By 1945, they had almost entirely ceased. The Japanese could not replace their losses fast enough, nor train new crews quickly enough. The mathematics that Evans and Battery C demonstrated on July 4, 1943, 12 bombers shot down in 27 minutes, 88 shells fired, 90% destruction rate, had scaled across the entire Pacific. Those numbers proved that American technology and Marines could defeat Japanese air attacks, and that Suicide Point could be turned into a killing ground for the enemy rather than Americans. The beach at Rendova is quiet now. The guns are gone. The bunkers have collapsed. The jungle has reclaimed most of the positions where the 9th Defense Battalion fought. But every July 4th, a few remember. They remember the day the planes fell. They remember Evans, Roy Boone, and John Skamborowski. They remember that 3 young Marines changed the course of air defense in the Pacific. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do us a favor, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to share this story with more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We are rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every day, stories about gunners, radar operators, and Marines who held the line with precision and courage. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you in the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, or Australia? Our community spans the entire globe. You're not just a viewer, you're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for ensuring that Evans and his crew do not fade into silence. These Marines deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.